Hello, my name is Gavin Powers, and I'll be talking to you today about the climate change debate. First off, I just want to state that there's no debate about global temperature increasing or whether the concentration of atmospheric CO2 is rising. There's no debate about CO2 being a greenhouse gas that will cause an increase in temperature in our atmosphere. The debate is on the quantity of warming caused by increases of CO2 and how much of that is caused by humans. The consensus view believes that CO2 is the control knob of increases of temperature. One example they bring in is a comparison between Earth and Venus. As we know, Venus is much hotter than Earth. It is roughly 800 degrees hotter in degrees Fahrenheit. So why is that? We know that the lengths between the sun are fairly similar. I mean, Venus is a little closer, but it's not as significant to produce the extreme differences in temperature. So the consensus view come up with the conclusion that it's because Venus has so much more CO2 in their atmosphere, and that causes increases in temperature. And with that conclusion, they can also make the conclusion that CO2 is a control knob of temperature in our world today. As we see in these two graphs, this graph depicts the carbon dioxide over the past 60 years. As we see, it's only been increasing. And when looking at the global temperatures over the past 130 years, right here is where this graph starts. As we see, global temperatures have only increased from them. There, they make the conclusion that because of the rises of CO2, it also increases the temperature in our world. Now let's hop to the minority view on CO2. The minority view believes that how could something that makes up such a small percentage of our atmosphere control the entire temperature? They believe that there's so much more variability that causes our temperature to change than just CO2. As this graph depicts, carbon dioxide only makes up 0.04% of our atmosphere. And the consensus view is saying this controls the entire temperature. That can't be. And of that 0.04% of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, man-made carbon dioxide makes up 3.5% of that 0.04% of carbon dioxide. It is such a fraction of a percentage that this cannot be causing the change in temperature. As seen in this diagram above, there were many historical periods where CO2 was much higher than it is today, and that it was well before humans were even on this earth, before man-made carbon dioxide even existed. So how can that be? There has to be other variables that control temperature, not just CO2. And as seen in the past, there have been many times when CO2 went down and temperature did not go down, or temperature went down and CO2 did not go down. So how could that be if carbon dioxide is a control knob? Now I'm going to be talking about the most controversial graph in the whole climate change debate, and honestly my favorite topic we've discussed this semester, and that is the hockey stick graph. So what does the hockey stick graph show, and why is it so controversial? So as we see in the graph here, the slope is fairly flat for around 1,000 years, and as we reach the Industrial Revolution, the graph spikes up, showing the temperature increase during the Industrial Revolution. And honestly, it shows the impact of man-made carbon dioxide on our atmosphere. This graph showed the public that global warming is coming a lot quicker than they could ever imagine, and that frightened them. When people began to question whether they accounted for the medieval warming period or times when temperature was hotter than it was today, the consensus stated that the medieval warming period was not global, and therefore the graph is suitable for global temperatures. Also, they stated that the graph has been replicated by numerous different scientists. So if you don't believe the graph, therefore you don't believe in science. Alright, so now what's the minority view about the hockey stick graph? As a minority view delved a little deeper into what did they do to make the graph look this way, I found out there was two different data sets used to produce that graph. The first data set used was tree ring data from this one specific tree in California. As we see here, the tree ring data is pretty flat, but as we know, tree ring data is not a very reliable source to measure temperature. And as we see right here in the darker portion of the graph, this is the part where he stopped using the data and started using temperature data that showed a sharp increase in temperature, producing the hockey stick graph that we know of today. And as the minority began to question the graph, they also realized what happened with the medieval warming period. As we see in this graph above, we see the medieval warming period, the temperatures were higher than they are today. And why isn't that shown in the hockey stick graph? Consensus view stated there are many different scientists that replicated the hockey stick graph. The minority view found out that many of these scientists were working with Michael Mann. It is clear to see the data manipulation and the cherry picking of data used by the consensus view in order to get the public on their side by over-representing the consensus view. The last topic I'll be discussing today is the power of money. So what is the consensus view? They believe that these big oil and fossil fuel interests are only funding these minority scientists so they can make a profit off them. Any data that they produce that goes against the consensus view will cause people to question whether the consensus is right. And with less people believing the consensus, the less regulations that will be passed and the more money they will make off them. I think that it's pretty obvious why these big companies are opposing the consensus view, because all businesses run off profit, and without profit, they can't run their business. So to me, it makes sense why they would oppose the view. So what does the minority view believe about the power of money? As many of the consensus view accuse those on the minority for following the money, the same can be said about those on the consensus view, and even more. It is shown that the consensus view has funded over $79 billion in research, over 1,000 times more than what the minority view has been funded for. Not only are the consensus scientists making so much money from doing research on the consensus side, also big banks are making money from carbon tax transactions. As depicted below, it is shown that these carbon taxes are given from the government to companies, and as carbon is emitted, if they go over, they're going to have to trade tax with a company that did not emit as much carbon. And through that transaction, the banks make money no matter what happens. So as shown, everyone chases the money. Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. Any kind of business is going to chase the money no matter. All right, so in conclusion to all this debate, I feel like it's necessary for me to discuss what I believe in. So before talking about climate change, before coming into philosophy class, discussing all this, honestly didn't really think about it that much. I just believe the consensus view because that was all that I saw on the news, all over the newspaper. I didn't do my own research. And after discussing all this, it made me realize maybe I should start digging deeper into some subjects and not just believing what I see. Because now I certainly believe in the minority view.